That's a great point, Joe. That reminds me of an opportunity I worked a while back where I was working directly with the IT executive and the CFO, and they were a very small client, like with a very small piece of service that we provided to them that I had sold 2 years ago. And this was like the whole enchilada, the rest of their system to provide support for. And I'll never forget it because the executive I worked with, we had the contract ready to sign. It was execution ready. And my main IT guy called me and he said, "Hey," he goes, "our CEO wants to talk to you." And I'm thinking, what? This is a $2 billion company. It wasn't a small shop, it was a big company. I said, "Why does the CEO want to talk to plain old Nate Teske? I'm the sales guy." So I'll never forget it. I was at my lake house and I'm sitting on the front porch talking to the CEO. And I'll never forget what he said. He goes, "We had negotiated discounts, all that stuff. The deal was ready." And I had coaching from my IT guy and the CFO that said, "He's going to ask for a discount. Don't give it to him." They literally said that. They're like, "Don't give him anything because he does this all the time." And I'm like, "Oh man, this could be big trouble, little China for me, right?" Because it was an over $1 million deal. So long story short, he's asking me, "Come on, do something for me. I'd really appreciate it." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "I'm sorry. We can't do anything. We've worked on this deal. It's ready to sign. Your CFO is ready to sign it. I'm sorry. We can't give anything else." And he's like, "Well, we're going to have to talk to your competition and blah, blah, blah." And then I'm thinking, oh no, did I just lose this deal? So I'm like, and I told him, I said, "Hey, totally understand if you have to, no problem." I hang up the phone and I called my IT guy. I said, "Hey, this is what I said." He's like, "Okay, good." He goes, "We're going to push this through." And then 2 or 3 days later, this contract came through signed. And I was like, whoo, because when he said that, I'm thinking, you know what? He's the CEO of the company, right? He can push things and what have you. But had I not had that coaching from them, I might have given them something, right? But I knew going into it, back to the whole thing with negotiations, knowledge is power, right? When you know the scenario and the truth behind the scenes, that helps. But until it's signed and fully executed, not even signed, fully executed, it ain't done.
That's right. We all know that. We all know
Yep,
that well, right?
exactly, exactly. So one question I have for you, Joe, is looking back on your career, back when we started at ADP back in the mid '90s, is there like what would you tell yourself looking back? And in a sense of what you know now, right? And when you're 21, 22, like we were, just getting our first car and having the Nokia phones. Remember those Nokia like little brick phones with the little antenna on it? Um, Telling yourself back then, like what would you tell yourself different to do differently in your career, with respect to just how you approach sales and how you did your business?
Well, that's a good question. Gosh, I look back every so often and my career trajectory within ADP and all those years, and I feel fortunate in a lot of ways to been able to be part of the organization that trained and developed you if you were willing to step out and you wanted it. And I feel like I got a really good, solid training and business acumen under ADP over those years. And so I don't know how much I would change. I know a lot of times people today, they're joining companies right out of college that you would never have heard of before, right? And I think we talked about this before, like back in those days, like your parents told you to go to college, work for a big company, get good benefits, right? And that's your ticket. And I think we all kind of believed it to some point. But I actually enjoyed that path because, like I said, I progressed through our small business. I executed, I performed, I did well, and I knew that I could reach for a higher rung based on me, mastering that skill set in that segment. And so then I moved to our major accounts, and I was a sponge, and I learned, and I found mentors, and I executed well and performed well. And then I reached for another, ring on the ladder and went to our national accounts and global enterprise. So I feel like I was very fortunate in that regard of being part of a company that supported growth, encouraged growth, rewarded performance. The old adage of, hey, as long as you keep doing well, the company's going to do well and there's going to be growth and opportunity. Like as long as the company keeps growing, opportunity keeps creating itself. And I think one of the sayings used to be, hey, the job that you have today and the job that you want tomorrow may not even exist. But as long as everybody keeps rowing the boat and keeps growing the way that we've consistently grown at double digits for all those years that, ADP used to mention, the opportunity is going to create itself. You just need to be in position to grab it. So I know that might not be the answer that you were kind of thinking along those lines, but I just digress there and go that way because again, I felt very fortunate to have the structure, the people, the processes around me. And then it was just me going for it. Right. And I think you kind of have to have that, right? You have to have that inside fire that you want to succeed and you want to do well. And then you just got to grab the opportunity. Right. I think one of the other things I would say is, I think early on in our sales careers, like, hey, sales is new to all of us. We could, we had sales classes. I was in marketing, was it 450 with our friend Ed Brada, right?
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
who did his best to kind of tell you the pitfalls of sales and the obstacles and the highs and the lows. And I think the highs and the lows was probably the biggest adjustment for me, probably in the first 10 years of sales, because God, did it feel good when you won a deal. Man, this was the best career choice I've ever made. This is the best job, the company. I love it. Look at my commission checks. But the lows took on a whole nother level,
Yeah.
right? You question yourself, your self-worth. Did I make the right career choice? Should I have gone into, some other field completely? And boy, that was tough balancing that, because we all went through enough of those cycles to where you struggled a lot of times with it, right? And so you had to build that internal mechanism to say, don't let the highs take you too high and don't let the lows take you too low, and just keep chugging along, right? Like, don't take those losses personally. Keep building the process, keep working the process and the pipeline. And when you get the big deal, you can't take 3 months off, right? You can't, like, hey, this is going to go on forever, because as we all know, it doesn't. And so once you close the big deal, they used to always say, get ready to close the next, right? Because if you take that time off, there's a gap, and then you start going through those lulls again and the lows, and those kind of rear their head, and that would be the biggest thing I would say from a younger or newer sales representative is you gotta balance those emotions and find mentors, right? I mean, I think we've all had great mentors in our life. They're not just going to just appear. Some cases they do, right? You kind of know who's a mentor, but you've got to find those people. You got to reach out and network, and they could be either internally in your company or externally through just networking through events and social things. But that's a big component. You have that network, and you have people you could bounce ideas off of, and highs and lows, and that will get you through it. And I think we all know and would all agree sales is a great career, and it's probably changed all of our lives to many degrees. But those are some of the things that I would look back and just reinforce to a younger or newer sales rep that I've learned over my time.
So I'm curious, because there's a lot of, in what you say, there's a lot of action, a lot of initiative, taking advantage of opportunities, finding mentors and things like that. I'm curious mentally, because the mental game is a really big part of it too. What did you tell yourself when you were in those lower phases that helped you get out of it and get back on track?
Yeah, good question. I think some of it was self-reflection and trying to dig out of it myself. The other part was, I felt like we always had very strong leaders at ADP, and you could lean on them to kind of help you through that. Like, it was very hands-on, call it micro, call it what you have, but if you had someone that you trusted, they were always willing to work with you to see beyond the current situation. Right. And then you were always surrounded by peers that were doing well in a lot of cases. Right. And or going through some of the lulls that maybe we were going through too. So, being in that peer group and working it through together as a team always helped. Right. And just understanding, like, hey, your next deal is right around the corner. You might not know it yet, but you got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep making those calls, keep doing it. And talk to Jim, talk to Pat, talk to Kristen, and find out what got them through it. And you did that, and before you knew it, you were out of that lull, right? You got that deal. And then, you kind of understood, like, hey, thanks for pointing me to those people or pointing me that direction, because that got me through it. And then you go through enough of those cycles, knowing that you have people that you can go through that have gone through it as well and will continue to go through it, and talking it through just built that confidence. Right? Build the confidence and the cadence that you can kind of work yourself through this and build a process, build your own process to not have to go through those highs and lows.
So having been at the company for as long as you were, I imagine you have a really interesting perspective on what separated the people from who did well versus the ones who did not.
Yeah, no, there was, it was very visible, right? From the scorecards and the daily and the weekly cadence and the legendary roll calls, right, Nate, where you showed up once a week physically in a room with all of your peers in the region and said, I either had this amount of money or I had to pass. And if you got a pass, boy, you felt like a goat. You felt terrible. So I think it's hard to say like if there's certain things that make successful salespeople versus others. I always lean back to you have to want it, right? And if you find yourself in a system that creates the opportunity to get better, you have to take advantage of that, right? Because there's some other companies that don't do that, right? They just kind of say, the old, here's your territory, here's your opportunity, call me if you need anything. That's hard to succeed in those environments. So you have to have the systems around you. And I think the people that did extremely well took advantage of those systems, built, from the ground floor for themselves. And maybe later in their career, they were able to transition to that very independent scenario and not have to have someone riding them once a week or once a month or things like that. And kind of feels like in a position I'm in today, right? Like I'm treated, differently, and I'm at a point in my career where I know what I need to do on a daily basis. I don't need someone to kind of tell me what to do, or obviously I could still use advice, I could still use guidance, but I think if the successful people had that, they just had that fire. If you come out and you want it, if you're competitive, if I don't want to go back to backgrounds or things like that, but if you played competitive sports, if you were someone that was competitive growing up and always wanted to do well in certain disciplines or schoolwork or just sports, like you had that fire, you were going to find a way. You were not going to see that scoreboard and see your name at the bottom or the middle. And I think when I had those types of things in front of me, that made me want to be on the top. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Joe. ADP had and has tremendous sales training, and Rob, you've heard this already from me. Every job that I've been in and every salesperson that I've met and known that worked at ADP, I never saw anyone work as hard as they did. And that was part of kind of the initial, especially when you start out right out of your career. Because remember, Joe, we had to be in from 8 till noon on Mondays and then 1 to 5 on Fridays. And we did the call blitzes, the cold calls. And I remember TJ McWilliams would say, he had a real raspy voice, Rob. He's like, we're stacking paper clips. And he would stack paper clips on his desk as he make the calls. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And he's like, we're stacking these up. And that was his way of kind of getting himself fired up, I guess. But it was interesting because you also mentioned talking about NIU, Ed Brada. That was one of our professors, Rob. And I remember he really enforced, he's like, hey, before you guys go out and start your career, take a month and go travel Europe. Do a backpack thing and go stay in hostels and stuff. And I'm like, what are you talking about, bro? No way. I'm going to get out of college. I'm going to go right to work and I'm going to go crush it. Which I did. Went right to ADP. I think I had like not even a week off after I graduated. But now, all that being said, looking back on my life, when my son graduated college, we didn't do a Europe trip. He wanted to go on a hunting trip. So we went on a hunting trip down in Texas for a week. Had an awesome time. Literally, he graduated that morning and we drove all night to Texas for a hunting trip for a week, which was awesome because that's what he wanted to do. And then my baby boy, Mitch, he's graduating in May and he did the study abroad spring of last year. My wife and I went to see him in Spain when he was out there, spent, 16 days we're out there. So we're doing another trip with him for it's going to be 10 or 12 days, something like that in Italy and Spain. And he's got everything kind of listed out what he wants to do. And we're kind of in the process of planning it now. But I never forget him saying that, Joe, where before you start your career, take a vacation, just kind of, just reward yourself for graduating college. Because once you're in the work world, you're in it, right? And you're in that tornado and you're, 30 years is going to go by like that, which it's true. It happens. So that was one thing that even though I didn't do it myself, looking back, I'm able to do it now with my sons. But, back to your point about the training and the team at ADP, it was in my opinion, it was a very sales oriented organization because it was all about growth. And the second thing I remember was float. Remember the whole thing about float? So what that means, Rob, ADP made their money on obviously the services and the fees associated with it. But the bigger piece and where they really rung the register from a financial standpoint was when they did the payroll. It was part of the whole tax processing thing. Well, taxes ain't due until the end of the quarter, right? So they take all that revenue from the customer with the payroll. And if your paycheck's $1,000, but $250 is taxes, $1,000 comes out of the account. Well, they take that $250 and they invest it for those 90 days or whatever it is, and that's how they made a ton of money. So that was a kudos to them because that's how they're able to grow as big as they did. And I know one of my former VPs, we interviewed him a couple of weeks ago. he also worked at ADP. And I jokingly said, yeah, people would say ADP stands for another dang problem. And he goes, yeah, you know what we called it, Nate? We called it alcoholics doing payroll. It was funny because the another dang problem was actually what a customer told me one time years ago when I worked there. So that was kind of funny from that standpoint.
That's great. Yeah, there's a few names, some that we can't probably mention here as
Yeah,
well that I know
we're
of.
trying to keep it G, but yeah. So with respect to your career, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but is there anything you would do differently, Joe? I know you spent almost 30 years at ADP, which is a tremendous run, right? And kudos for you for being able to navigate through all the changes and going from when you and I would actually have, and I don't think they do it anymore, but they actually had the guys in Harwood Heights. There was a lot of old retired fellas that would physically deliver the checks to people, right, on payday. Fast forward to now, it's mostly direct deposit and, all digitized and such. So navigating all those changes through the years, that's a feat in and of itself. But is there anything looking back that you would change or potentially do differently with respect to your career?
Good question. I kind of go back to my thought that, I've been fortunate. Like, I feel like I took a path that I was very grateful for. I came out of college and this was my internship. And so, I saw a solid organization, didn't know what selling payroll was, but knew that they had tight processes, were award winning from a sales training standpoint. And I knew that if I could join a company like this, hey, I don't know if it's going to be a 30-year career. If I would make it 5 years, I could take this somewhere else. But I think I was sold enough on that first 5 years that, gosh, I could grow within this organization and really have a full career here, which again wasn't the goal, right? It was to take it 5 years and move on and go somewhere else where I can grow. I was fortunate that I was able to grow internally. And, I think the opportunities for me were from a sales perspective. I grew as a sales professional in the small, medium, and enterprise space. And then I was in leadership in all three of those as well. So it gave me a full, well-rounded perspective from a sales career standpoint that I touched all the bases. So, some would say, hey, it's working for a big company, big processes and so forth. I enjoyed that. It's not for everybody, right? It's some people like to be working for a more fast forward thinking culture or startup environment, and they love to cut their teeth on that, right? Like they don't know where the next check is coming from, literally. That wasn't me. And I don't know if that would have ever been me to jump out from, call it the comforts of a large organization. Sometimes I would pause and think like, hey, should I go to a startup? Should I take that risk and do that? But I really enjoyed the structure and the comforts of having the brand recognition, the training, the investment in our people. I really enjoyed that. So I don't know if I changed much along those lines. I really I feel fortunate in that regard.
Given what a rarity is for people to spend that much time in an organization, what advice would you have for somebody who really wanted to do that?
To go down a path of having a career within one organization?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I would say, if you're truly looking to invest yourself with potentially one organization and making it a career, do your homework on the front end. Make sure that you see the growth there, you see the opportunity to spend, a long period of time, making sure that you talk to not just the recruiters and your initial manager, but go wider and make sure that you talk to people that have been there a while. And maybe even have them point you to people that may have left or people that have rebounded, so to speak, right? Like, hey, give me someone that was with the organization for 10 years, left, and then came back. And talk to that person as to what, made you think that you outside of the organization was the better choice and what brought you back. That probably give a younger person some perspective as to, maybe why the grass might not be greener on the other side. And it's hard to say nowadays. I mean, with how the speed of business and technology, gosh, to say that you want to commit to an organization for 20 or 30 years is crazy, right? Like people can't see further than 5 years with companies, and the company may not be around 10 or 15 years from now. So that's a hard one to say up front early on, like, hey, I want to build a career here, because unless the name career means something different nowadays, it's not 30 years, it's career could be 10 in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I started at Leo Burnett, I remember thinking I wanted to be chairman of the company, and it's an unrecognizable company from where I started, and so there's no way. And there was a lot of, to your point, as you get moving in the organization, you realize that maybe, this is not exactly what I thought it was, or maybe, wow, this is even better. And look at all these great opportunities. You just don't know until you get in some cases.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one last question, Joe, and I was thinking about this as you talked about transitioning internally, because when we were in I think they called it Heartland, I believe, the small, more transactional deals and such. So going from that to a strategic account role or a national account role, what advice would you give somebody who may be in that, like what I consider like a business development role, where maybe, throughout my career, I had people that would be, newer to sales, and their job was to make cold calls for me and get meetings, then I would take the meeting. When those people transition from that biz dev role to an actual sales exec role, especially with strategic or bigger deals, or going from a smaller transaction type thing, more high volume, to bigger deals, multi-month sales cycles, what advice would you give someone who may be in that transition now? They're like, holy cow, how do I sell $1 million contract? What's the best way to go about doing it? What advice would you give someone? Because as you know, Joe, it's very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was absolutely very different. The different segments that you're in. I think, when I was making those transitions, I think it wasn't a natural progression, so to speak, going small, medium, large by design. It was more of when I was in small, I had some opportunities that all of a sudden I found a larger opportunity, and I found this lead, right? And so the process was then to work it with this major account rep. And, I would always, instead of just flipping it over to them, I would say, hey, can I join you on that call? I'd love to understand how you do your role, what it looks like. And I'm thinking that somewhere down the line, I may want to go to this path. Like, can I join you? And 9 out of 10 times, they had no problem having me be part of that call and shadow them. And it gave me really good insights as to, wow, that was an amazing call, or I didn't even think of those questions. And it opened your eyes and got you excited, at least me, for that next step possibly. So I was always thinking about like, hey, I don't know what the next step looks like, but I've got to find out. Maybe I could work some angles with some deals, or maybe I could just shadow someone. I would reach out and network internally when I was going to global enterprise and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. Can I join a call? Can I be part of your team meeting? Can I get on a ride day with you? And again, most of them were like, yeah, for sure, man. I don't have much going on, but I got this call and this call. And then you not only build your network, right? You show interest. Now that as those people are building their pipeline of next generation of sales teams and reps and so forth, they know that you have interest. They know that you really engaged. And so then when you reach out to those leaders and say, hey, I'm thinking about a transition. I've had this success. I've watched some of your people. I've actually brought them leads and helped them and watched them close these opportunities. I want to learn more. Like, what can I do to be part of your organization? So again, you showing that desire and that growth opportunity within your mindset and taking that, leap of faith to jump into your next career possibility, I think that showed well and made the transitions more natural for me. Even internally, as you all know, those opportunities don't just happen, right? You've got to sell yourself. So you've got to figure out how to network internally and put your name out there at the top of the board and then follow through. And your brand, as we all know, is even probably more important if you're going to stay with an organization a long time than jumping from organization to organization, right? I mean, everyone knows you. They know what you stand for. They know how you perform. They know how you handle the deal or yourself. They've interacted with you. They know, should I put this candidate forward for an opportunity, or boy, I know too much about that person and they never held themselves the right way, or they've squirreled out on a few deals. Like, we're never going to move that person to the next phase.
Yeah, that's awesome you had that, Joe, because a lot of times you don't have it, right? You have to go to a different company to get in that position, and you may or may not have the ability to do what you did. So kudos to you for embracing that, and that had to help make the transition easier too.
Absolutely, because you knew about the role. You can speak to the role before the role even came open, right? You had a contact and a network of 3 or 4 people that knew you because you've took the initiative to go on those opportunities, and that opened the doors, right? Internally, for sure.
And that's the key word, is initiative, because when we talked about it before, but it's something that I always look for from a recruiting standpoint too, because you can't teach that. That's I can't, get you to, if you don't have that and you don't bring it to the table naturally. But what's really fascinating is that people respond to it predictably and unconsciously. So it doesn't surprise me when you said 9 out of 10 would say, oh yeah, come on, because you're probably one of only, a handful of people who ever even asked.
That's right. That's right. A lot of them were surprised, like no one's really asked me before, or
Yeah.
gosh, they were a little taken aback. Like, yeah, for sure, let's do it. I'll show you what I do.
Yeah. That's your brand initiative. I mean, I heard it throughout the whole conversation. It doesn't surprise me that ADP looked for places to, well, it sounds like it was twofold. You were actively looking for opportunities and creating opportunities, but the company was also recognizing that too, which is
Sure.
great because not every company recognizes it.
Yeah, and I would also add, Rob, at ADP, very quickly, they would weed out people that couldn't handle saying pass when they didn't sell anything each week, because that's a tremendous amount of pressure, especially when you're a young person and you're kind of
Yeah.
trying to figure out the business world. When you had to say it, A, it sucked, but B, you did everything you could that particular week to make sure you came next week with a deal in hand, right? And as you talked about, Joe, they know a little bit about you and such. There's a term, and I'm going to butcher the term, but it's from a Navy SEAL, a retired Navy SEAL I follow on LinkedIn. And the guy said something to the effect of, your smell or the smell of you shows up way before you actually show up. And I know that's not the right term, the wording or whatever, but I have to look it up. But it's true, right? People know and people talk. And if you go up for promotion and the guy or gal you transition that large account deal to, and they're like, hey, do you know Joe Gillhaus? Oh yeah, he helped work on, ABC company that we closed, and that was a deal he was really interested in learning about. And whether or not you got credit, financially for that or quota credit, you may not have, or you probably didn't. But just the fact that you did it differentiated you from everybody else who was in the running for that particular potential national account gig or large account deal or whatever you call it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things, to one of your questions before about, like, early on in your career, what would you have done differently, or what, how would you have gone about things differently maybe? And I guess I identified early, but maybe not fully in my mind, but knowing like your brand is really important, right? Like how you treat people, how you treat your opportunities, how you conduct yourself is so important because it carries on with you, right? And there's that saying, I don't know exactly right, but you can burn down your history in a few wrongly worded sentences or statements, and your whole history, or your whole, what's the word I'm looking for? Your brand is ruined, right? And you can't get that back. The trust is broken, and so how you carry yourself and how you conduct business is really important as you progress through a career, because people, to your point, whether you're in the room or not, they'll speak more about you outside of the room, and you want to make sure what they're saying is the right things, and it's how you carry yourself and how you conduct business.
Yep, right on. I agree totally. Yeah. So Joe, thank you so much for taking time. I mean, we know you're super busy with your day to day, being in sales, and Rob and I greatly appreciate you making time to speak with us. It's a great conversation, and I love some of the stories and the analogies you brought to it today. And definitely look forward to continue talking with you in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This is great. All right, and this concludes another episode of Sales Stories with Nate Teske. So stay tuned. There's lots of interviews coming up. If you like what you heard, definitely hit that like button, subscribe. It's all free to do. Really helps us in the algorithm. Put a comment in. If you've got questions for our guests, by all means, if you think there's something that we should be asking everybody that we haven't yet asked, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned because there's a lot more to come. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.